At that time, there was a significant oil boom in the area, so thousands of people flooded the city and county to work in the oil fields nearby. This caused the city to get a little rougher, as you had people from all over the country moving there to work, and that many people in a small place increased the cost of living, and we saw a large increase in violent crimes, as well as traumatic injuries. We worked 24-hour shifts, which weren't too bad. The days were usually somewhat busy, and at night the ambulance station had rooms with twin beds that allowed you to get some fairly decent sleep at night. Most of the calls that would classify as crazy, creepy or scary always tend to come at night. The day that this story takes place was a little different than normal. Normally I get an EMT basic partner, which means since I'm the advanced provider of the truck, I get all of the patients. But today I had another Paramedic partner because we were training in a new hire paramedic. It was her first day in FDO, Field Training Orientation. This means we generally let her take the calls and sit back and evaluate her performance to ensure she's capable and doesn't kill anyone. This was her first job after graduation, so she was still pretty green. I could see she was very nervous and trying very hard to do her best. So, as per usual, the day was pretty busy, but as it began to wind down, I was getting ready to attempt to take a nap. I kick off my boots and lay down on the bed, on top of the covers. Easy to get up and going that way if a call comes in. I put my radio up by my head, full volume like always, so I can be sure to wake up if we get a call. Sure enough, midnight starts to roll around and I hear a call go out. Dispatch says, "Man who has been stabbed, not breathing." Luckily, it's not my call, and another ambulance responds, so I go back to bed. Or I try to. About 30 minutes later, another call goes out, and this time it's for me. Dispatch information: man with a knife wound on his hands. Police are on the scene. I get my boots on, wake up the new girl and my partner, and walk out to the ambulance. The area of the call was right smack dab in the middle of downtown. We responded non-emergent as it was not a life-threatening injury. As we arrive on the scene, there's probably around 6 police cars on scene with all their lights on. The area itself was through an alleyway and behind a building just off the main streets. As we pull up, there were a number of officers, a couple sheriff deputies, and a detective all standing around this man with a rag on his hand. As I got closer, I could see the man was bald, middle-aged, and almost a homeless look to him. He also had a big dark spot in the middle of his forehead. One of the officers approached me to fill me in on what's going on before I talk to the guy and start to treat him. The officer tells me the man has a large laceration on the back of his hand that he received from a knife. At this point, I was still a bit groggy and didn't put 2 and 2 together. The officer says the man said he was attacked by another man and that he's probably going to need stitches. So, as it's not serious, I have my FTO approach first to begin her assessment and give me her treatment plan. I stay close behind her and we both walk up to the man who's in handcuffs. As we approach, the dark spot on the guy's forehead is now clear. On the center of his forehead, stretching from his eyebrows and what would have been in his hairline, is the biggest swastika tattoo I've ever seen. My FTO begins to talk to the man, and I stand back and observe. Something about the man's general composure and responses chilled me. When we first walked up, the man was muttering something under his breath. I couldn't tell what he was saying, but he was repeating it over and over. My FTO asked police to uncuff him to see the cut on his hand more clearly. At this point, one of the other officers produced the knife he believes to be the weapon that caused the injury. The knife was in an evidence baggie, and it was covered in blood. It was nothing special, just like a cheap plastic pocket knife that you could buy at some cheesy gift shop. It was a folding knife with a black plastic handle and a blade that was maybe 3 inches long, with a bit of serration towards the handle. The man showed us his hand. On the back, cutting right through another large swastika tattoo, was a laceration that went from the base of his pickle finger to the lower fleshy part of the thumb. It was quite wide, about 3 centimeters, exposing the bones of his metacarpals as well as his tendons. The bleeding had mostly stopped with pressure from the towel he was holding onto. When my partner asked the man what had happened, the man then repeated to us what he had been repeatedly muttering to himself. "I killed him, man. He's dead, man. I had to have killed him. He's got to be dead. At this point, I'm starting to put it together and understanding the larger picture. We get the man into the ambulance so we can assess for any other injuries that may not be visible under his clothing. After a thorough search, we realise there were no other injuries, so we begin to transport him to the hospital. My FTO bandaged the man's hand, and as we're driving, I started to ask questions to try and figure out the details. The man told me everything I wanted to know, and never lost that chilling vibe, staring distantly as he recounted what happened. The man told me that he is homeless, and he was wandering around when a friend offered him a ride. He says that he was leery of the man, but decided to get in anyway and accept the offer. The man said the friend began asking him if he hated the N-word. The man said he didn't, and that he wasn't racist. He tells me that this is when his friend became upset with him and tried to stab him with a pocket knife. The man said he attempted to defend himself, managed to wrestle the knife away from his friend, and stabbed him back before jumping out of the car and running. So with this shocking telling of the tale, we continue to transport the man in silence. Also, as a side note, an officer rode in the ambulance with us the whole way. After we dropped the man off at the ER, we all kind of sat there shocked, leaving the hospital. We returned to the station and tried to get some sleep. However, we were not destined for sleep this night. An hour later, we get another call for a body removal from downtown, less than 3 blocks away from our last call. We pull up to the area, which was in the middle of the street. The street itself was blocked off 100 feet on both sides by a fire truck and police car. The fire truck was equipped with a double stack of 4 halogen lights, risen up on the ladder, shining down to illuminate the area. Walking up with the stretcher and body bag, the detective on scene tells us they're done with the investigation and they're ready for us to take the body to the medical examiner's office. At this point, we're still about 50 feet away from where the body lay. From where we are, I can see the person lying in the middle of the street. We get closer and take a few minutes to examine the body. What I see, and put together what I was told, is astonishing to say the least. The man, another middle-aged man, appears white, possibly Mexican, lays in the middle of the street on his back, with his arms spread eagle and his legs straight. There's a vehicle parked on the side of the road, with its driver door still open. I figured that must be this guy's vehicle. It was parked neatly, not haphazardly or incorrectly. The deceased man has streaks of blood coming from his nose and mouth, with several small puncture wounds on his face and cheeks. Looking at his torso, there are about a dozen more knife-shaped puncture wounds in his chest and abdomen. Most of the wounds were so jagged and barbaric looking, you could see his adipose tissue fat pushing out of them. There wasn't much of a blood puddle under the man, but a very large trail of blood ran from the man to the side of the street where the curb is. The blood then continues its flow another 10 feet along the curb before spilling into a storm drain. With that much blood, the man was exsanguinated and bled out there in the middle of the street. We packed the man into the body bag and transported him to the ME's office. When we got back to the station, my charge medic told me the officer that rode with the first patient requested that we fill out a report on what we heard the man say. Thankfully, the rest of the shift was uneventful. Fast forward to a couple years ago, I received a call from the state's attorney. He asked me if I remembered the call, to which I informed him I do. He told me that this person is going to trial for murder, is pleading not guilty, and he would like to go over my statement with me, as I would be a key witness and require my testimony in court. We went over my statement and we talked about it a bit. Then, he told me he would be in touch and wished me a good day. A few days later, he calls me up again and informs me that the man changed his plea to self-defense and that I was needed in court in a week. Literally one day before the trial, he calls me up again. He tells me this time the man has changed his plea to guilty and I was no longer needed. I don't know what happened after that. I never really looked into it. It's just another brick in the wall, so to speak. A story filed away in my brain, probably never to be forgotten. About 20 years ago, my best friend at the time and his wife had her father, Felix, living with them. They were his caretakers. They pretty much did everything for him, and that included cleaning him every morning, because of his incontinence and difficulty holding his bowels. They really did a great job and deserved my compliments several times. One day my friend Mike went into Felix's room when he would normally be awakening, only to find him in full rigor mortis. Felix had sadly passed sometime in the night. I was employed at the time as a cemetery pre-needed salesman, but also could arrange at-need services, and so I did. I helped them to prepare Felix's final resting location and waived my commission, as I didn't feel right charging it to these two individuals who had done so much to make Felix's last years comfortable. About a week later we held the service, at which I officiated, and it was well attended, and we gave Felix the send-off he deserved. I rode home in the limo provided for family by the funeral home/cemetery after the service, and we all sat around for a while, just decompressing and taking a well-needed break. The wife, Mary, then noticed that there was a message on their answering machine. Yes, this was during the time where we had physical landlines and attached answering machines. She pressed the play button and the timestamp the machine read was oddly the identical time as when we had the graveside service for Felix. It was recorded at 11 a.m. The graveside service was at 11 a.m. We thought at first it was just someone who'd missed the service calling to wish condolences. When the recording started, every jaw in the room suddenly dropped, and an honest-to-goodness chill filled the room. There were 5 of us present: Mike and Mary, the daughter, myself, my brother James, and a friend of theirs from across the street whose name I did not know. The background noise was the first thing we heard, and it sounded like someone was in a room with a large group of people. You know, lots of audible voices, but nothing we could completely discern. Then Felix spoke. The voice on the recording was clearly and unmistakably Felix. "Please do not follow me," was what he said, and then the recording stopped. We had what seemed like a recently deceased parent calling during his own funeral service, begging us please not follow him. Don't follow him into death? Not possible. Don't follow his life choices? He'd made many bad ones, including a brief stint in prison for a relatively minor offence. Here's the one that his daughter, though, was his intent. Don't follow me into hell. She believed until her dying day that her father had made contact one last time, telling her not to follow his path and end up where he did once he took that step into the unknown journey called death. 20 years later, and I remember that moment and the stunned silence, shock, and fear of that moment like it just happened today. What do you think? To this day, I'm 100% certain that phone call was indeed contact from Felix in the afterlife. This is both experiences that have happened in the past and something that happened tonight that scared the shit out of me. I've wanted to post for a while, but this one seemed like a homeless person at first. I have a few other encounters I'm tempted to put in form when I was very young, but I'm worried I was just your average overactive kid. Oh, and sorry if some of what I say doesn't make sense, because my adrenaline's through the roof and fight or flight instincts are going nuts. So for a few months now, something weird has been hanging around and outside my house. The first time it became apparent was when one night I was in the basement. Outside the window is a porch. There is a light switch for the lights by the door. I went upstairs for a bit when I realised later I left the lights on. I went downstairs to turn them off. When I came down, the porch lights were on. Now my father has tried endlessly to hook them onto a tan with no success, to his disappointment. I assumed that he'd finally figured it out and paid the lights no mind. What I hadn't known was my dad had given up weeks ago and had put in an average light switch. Next morning, I go down and see the lights are still on. I assume the timer didn't turn them off, so I go to shut them off and discover to my shock it's a switch. This causes me to panic because that meant someone had been out there and the rest of my family was asleep last night, and quite likely they could have been watching me. By the way, I have an extreme fear of being watched. A few weeks later, I'm sitting downstairs on the couch. I'm home alone, it's dead of night, and my dog, who is very relaxed with frequent events but has a habit of being to chill sometimes. Suddenly she perks up and looks out the window. Out of habit, I took with her and see something hunched and white dropping down over our fence and run past the windows. Thanks to the dirty windows and the glare of the lights, I couldn't even hope to make out what I saw or how big it was. But I yelped, panicked, and called my buddies. They were skeptical and told me it was probably a raccoon, and I ended up agreeing. I went outside, my dog's older chocolate lab, and my German Puggle, German Shepherd Pug Beagle mix, no one had been with me. I went out trying to see what it was right away. My dogs had two very different reactions. The lab was pacing and sniffing and looking around, being very anxious. The other was wagging her tail and looking at the trees, the way she does when I have treats. Suddenly, from said trees, I hear a loud groan. These are big, strong old trees, and they don't groan, not unless something is on them. And the mountain lion who went up there a year ago proved that. Midwest United States, by the way. Now, I tried shining a light up there, but saw nothing. But the trees are thick, and it wasn't until that mountain lion growled last time that I saw him up there in broad daylight. FYI, it is weird seeing mountain lions here when authorities came, though they ended up determining it was sick and malnourished, so they weren't shocked it wandered into the area. I ended up going inside because my Puggle was moving between the trees with the same look. My lab seemed to be getting increasingly anxious, but now was staying away from the trees and just watching them. My Puggle and me, and I wasn't seeing anything, so... But all night I heard weird things. There was a loud slam, like a tree branch had fallen, but there was nothing there. And my Puggle kept going to the windows and acting unhappy about being kept in. But the rest was like the sound of something on the roof, pebbles being thrown at the window, and the turn of a woodpecker who should have been dead after my cats got the poor thing with a vengeance. I don't know where they were in all this. Now, here was the climax that drove me here. It's been a couple of months now, and I've mostly forgotten about it. Occasionally I'll hear something weird on the front porch, or footsteps on the porch, lights will get turned on mysteriously. But they're small things. Tonight I was with my sister and FaceTiming with a friend in the basement again, when we hear a screeching sound. Now my first concern was 2 of my 3 cat siblings who had been taking over the area, which meant they liked to fight the raccoons, dumb cats. Now the sound didn't sound like any raccoon I'd ever heard, but they make odd sounds, especially when data are attacking it. So I run to the window in the next room, where I believe I'll be able to see them go out to break the fight up from a safe distance, but I instead let out a scream and a flurry of curse words. Outside, standing taller than me for sure, I'm 6 foot so pretty tall, was a gaunt, white, humanoid figure with its back turned to the window. When I got back to the window and looked back out, it was nowhere to be seen. I at first thought it was my mind playing tricks on me. There was snow on the ground and I was dying for a rational explanation, because it scared me bad. I was shaking. I told my sister and she laughed at me. I went upstairs later that night and got everything ready for the night and locked up. When I went back up front, I froze. I could see my cat, who seemed agitated, but calm for the most part, on the garage roof, looking at something on my porch. That something was the same white figure, turned again, except this time it was squatted down and looking at my cat. It didn't seem confrontational itself. But then, for God's sakes, this sent me into tears. It turned its whole body twisted, and it seemed to kind of straighten as it did. I can only think of a meerkat as an example, but it was so sudden, I was sure I heard bones crack through the window. I never saw the face. As soon as it turned, fight or flight kicked in, and I ran to my room as fast as I could. The last thing I saw as it slammed my door was it on the railing as it leaped towards what I assumed was the nearby tree. So in my hometown in the middle of the Mist West, there's a gas station. It's on a fairly well-used road and it's in the middle of a town a short walk from the local airport. On the opposite end is a hotel that has changed many hands over the years, but it's had a very boring history since it was built. However, the field next to the hotel is the location of interest. It's fairly large and has pretty tall grass growing. Since the day that the hotel was built there have been stories coming from people staying on the side of the hotel closest to the field. They report fairly unusual sounds, like scratching on windows or gasping from the outside. Weird as the apparitions seen in the field. Personally, I didn't know any of this till recently. I'll get onto that later. My first encounter was at the new Casey's General Store. Like I said, this gas station is right across and has never had activity, but the field is within sight, so it's easy to spot something. I visit the gas station frequently on the way to work, so I've seen quite a bit. I think the first time I saw something, I saw a fairly short kind of fat man looking. I just assumed about 50 feet in. His shoulders just above the grass's highest point. Problem is, looking right at them, they disappear, so as far as I know, it was a tall kid. Next time there were three, a woman in a dress, a man with a ball cap, and a man in a uniform. But as I'm waiting for my gas to fill up, I realise they vanish. Looking up from the pump, I see a man across from me. He's looking confused with the field. I got to say, I said the creepiest thing I could have at that moment. They don't like it when you look right at them. He looked at me clearly, hadn't realised I was there. He looked horrified. But after explaining, he said he thought he'd been going crazy, because he worked at the hotel and had seen them frequently, but never a good look. Apparently, he got frequent complaints about customers having people peeping through their windows, and when he, the security guard, went to investigate, he'd find nothing, not even footprints. But he'd figured out the corner of his eye while looking. He talked for a bit, seeing if he knew any history. He knew as much as I did, which was zip. City records say the field's never been used, and before the hotel, there wasn't anything in that plot for about 70 years back. Thought it was weird, but I think things are starting to spill over the gas station. Talking to an attendant that I've been friendly with, she said that she'd been seeing people by the pumps out of the corner of her eyes. Then today I drove up, there was some kind of workman's truck sitting away from the pumps. From the cabin I could see a person. I didn't look like directly at them, I could tell they were looking at me. I didn't even really register that they were there completely. But when I came out, there was a police officer standing and writing something on a form. I'm a good guy and was worried this cop was going to give the guy a ticket for illegally parking there. The cops are pretty ticket happy. I go up, the figure is gone now, and say, "Hey man, the guy just walked inside. Besides, it's legal to park there." The cop looked at me confused, saying, "You said the owner is here?" I nodded. "Well, that's not possible." "What do you mean?" He pointed a little ways away, a weird red stain on soaked concrete. "Officer, the driver was involved in a hit and run. He just died last night at a hospital." I realised what was sort of going on. Whether it's actually connected to the field or not isn't the point, but something weird I remember is how the figure was sitting completely facing the car window, towards me, and turning his whole body as he watched me. The cop ended up searching for a break-in, found nothing. In fact, the keys were locked inside the truck, and they'd have to tow it. About 6 years ago, I moved to another city for work. I worked for a 911 ambulance service that responded to calls in the city, as well as the county, which had a few other small towns. The city itself was not a large city, about 100,000 people. Working for that service required working 24-hour shifts. It wasn't particularly busy. Maybe you'd get 5 or 10 calls in 24 hours, and generally get some decent sleep at night. The city was a pretty rough place, as the oil industry had boomed there, which drew all sorts of folk from around the country to work in the oil fields nearby. One night in January, me and my partner, who was an EMT basic, received a call in the next town over. It was about 2 a.m. when the call came out, and the only information we had was that a person in an apartment called 911 after hearing the downstairs neighbour screaming for help. We responded emergent as the details were very limited. When we arrived on scene, police and fire departments were already there, and we were getting ready to make entrance into the building with them. The person who called 911 was there, and told us which apartment she heard the screaming from. We attempted to pound on the door at first to get the resident to come to the door. When no one answered, the fire department got ready to spread the door and make entry. Luckily, the landlord showed up and gave us keys to get into the unit. As we opened the door, the creepiness started. The apartment was pitch black, not a single light, as if no one was home. Police entered first, and with our flashlights, we followed. Looking around the apartment, the kitchen and dining room looked like a hoarder's nest. I'm not exaggerating. when I say there were literally 5-foot tall mountains of garbage, food, dishes in the kitchen. The same in the living room, but with magazines, clothes, and more garbage. This meant there was only a very narrow walkway to navigate the apartment. Officers proceeded down the hallway ahead, where the bedroom and bathroom was. One of the officers stopped at the bathroom door, as there was light shining from underneath. The officer opened the door, and just stood in the hallway. With a flat tone, he said, "She's in there." I walk in first into the bathroom. The first thing I notice is the peculiarity of the light. It's a very, very pale yellow light coming from a single bulb on the ceiling, similar to those old heat lamps that used to be common in bathrooms. The light gave off an odd vibe, as it was just so unnatural. The next thing I noticed is the lack of anything in the bathroom. No floor mats, no toilet cover, no towels, no knickknacks. Just nothing. Empty, except the vanity which contained the sink. On top, in the bowl of the sink, were approximately 20 to 30 makeup bottles piled up. Some were opened and leaking, causing there to be powders and liquids everywhere. The last thing I noticed was the body of an elderly woman lying naked in the tub. As I walk closer, I can see her lying on her side, nearly in the fetal position. Her skin is pale, and there's about 8 inches of water in the tub. Looking at her face, her eyes are closed, and her head is against the bottom of the tub, with her mouth and nose completely submerged underwater. My partner steps in behind me. He suggests we just call the coroner and inform him of the body. 2 officers pile into the bathroom behind my partner, so there's 4 of us in this tiny bathroom, with me next to the lady in the tub. With me being who I am, I decided to do my due diligence and at least make sure the lady is dead. I kneel down next to the tub and reach my arm and put my fingers on the neck, attempting to check for a carotid pulse. In an instant, without warning or the slightest hint of movement, the woman springs up out of the tub with the agility and speed of a feral cat. The only reaction I was able to manage was to just stand up as quick as possible, and I just stood there, staring at her. She stared back at me, eyes wide as can be, before she started screaming at me. She attempted to cover herself with her hands as best she could, while sitting in the water still. I quickly look around and notice everyone else who was in the bathroom with me bolted out of there. Not a single soul in sight. I tried to steel myself and tried calming the lady down, telling her who I was and why I was there. She denied screaming and told me she does this every morning as she does some kind of joint condition, and soaking in warm water helps ease her joint pain. Now at this point I have my doubts, and I have to question this woman's sanity. I question her regarding self-harm, and address what potentially could be interpreted as suicidal behaviour. She denies all of it. The next step is to determine her mental capacity, to ensure she's in the right frame of mind, to make reasonable and appropriate decisions. She answers all my other questions appropriately, and at this point, per the law, she's able to refuse any and all care as she's mentally sound. I ask her if she will at least allow me to check her vitals so that I can be sure she is healthy and I can add it to my reports. She vehemently refuses and tells me to get out of her house, which she has the right to. I acknowledge and have a sign a refusal of service form. As I leave the bathroom, my partner, the 2 officers that were in the bathroom with me, along with the 2 other officers and firefighters that were waiting in the apartment, are just staring at me with wise-eyed and gaping mouths, speechless. I don't say a word, and we all leave the apartment. Once we all got outside, I had the most uneasy, uncontrolled fit of laughter. My partner and the other officers started laughing too. I thought I might shit myself. My partner told me later that all he remembers is seeing her move, hearing me say, "Oh fuck," which I don't even remember, and running out of the bathroom. I wish I could say I never saw this lady again, but that would be untrue. About 3 months after the first call with the bathtub lady, I'm working with another EMT basic partner. Not the same one as before, but he's well aware of the story. So the day is going by like normal, and nightfall comes. I'm hoping to get some sleep, as generally night is a little calmer. Each of our stations have a few bedrooms with twin beds to allow us to at least sleep somewhat comfortably. Take off my boots and lay down and doze. I always keep my radio turned way up and by my head so I can wake up if we get a call. Sure enough, tones drop on the radio and I wake up. Looking at the clock, it's around 4 a.m. Radio traffic requests the ambulance for a welfare check on an individual who's not been seen for a while. Me and my partner get up, put our boots on, and start responding to the address. As we get closer, I start recognizing the area. Before I even see the building, I tell my partner, I swear to God, if it's the same fucking lady. He just laughs and we continue. As we pull up on the scene, same, sure as shit, same fucking building. At this point, my heart starts to race again. A few officers are already on the scene. As I get out of the ambulance, one of the officers comes up and tells me, the lady we are here for has a friend that works at the gas station nearby. The friend told 911 that the lady usually comes and visits him every day, but the friend hasn't seen her in a few weeks. The officer also tells me there's an odour coming from the apartment complex. If you work in EMS or have been around such, you know what that means. If not, then I won't spoil it just yet. I asked the officer if she's familiar with this person, or has heard the story of the last encounter. The officer tells me she's not, but her two co-workers behind her were on the original call with me, and are smiling, but not saying a word. I tell the officer who the person is, and our last run-in with her. The officer just raises an eyebrow a bit and says, okay. So we approach the apartment complex yet again. As I open the main door, you can immediately smell the odour permeating through the entire complex. We walk downstairs to the door of this lady's apartment. I bang on the door a few times and shout, ambulance. No response. Officers bang on the door. No response. We try to get a hold of the landlord again to give us access, but he's unavailable. Over the radio, I request the fire department and request they bring the door spreader. The fire department arrives and they come downstairs and set up the door spreader. If you don't know what a door spreader is, it's a tool that the fire department places between the two door jambs and use a lever to start pressing the door jambs apart, freeing the latch from the door frame so you can get in. As they finally get the door open, the awful wafting smells spill out of the apartment. Same thing as last time. Pitch black, piles of garbage all around the apartment, 5 feet high, that barely allow you to move through. Though this time it's a bit different. There are thousands of flies buzzing around. Again, the officers enter first, with us following with our flashlights. One of the male officers gets down the hallway to the bathroom and opens the door. He looks at me, shakes his head, and continues forward. My EMT partner, who was pretty new, is right behind me. I turn to him and tell him to wait in the hallway, and that I'll let him know if I need him. I was trying to be nice and spare him. The officer continues down the hallway toward the bedroom. At this point, the anxiety is increasing, because now we're in uncharted territory, and once again, I have no idea what we're going to find. The officer eventually makes it to the bedroom. I see him shine his lights at the bedroom, then uses the bend of his elbow to cover his mouth and nose. He waves me over. As I walk to him, the smell only gets stronger. I peer in the bedroom with my flashlight, and that's when I see her. The bedroom is set up so the bed is right in the middle of the room, with the head pressed against the wall. So there's some space on either side of the foot of the bed, or at least there would be, if the floors weren't filled up to the height of the bed with clothes, magazines, books, food, and garbage. At the foot of the bed are two large 4-foot tall piles of random shit that at the base are probably 4 feet in diameter. I know it's hard to visualize, but picture two large conical shaped mounds side by side at the foot of the bed. In the tiny space between the huge mounds and at the foot of the bed lies Bathtub Lady. Now this lady is a very small old lady. When I saw her the first time, she maybe weighed 90 pounds. She's also white. Stunned for a moment, I stand there next to the officer and just look. This is the part that gets grotesque. Bathtub Lady is lying perfectly on her back with her arms folded up and crossed in front of her like you would see a skeleton doing in the movies. Bathtub Lady's skin looks almost like paper. It's dried out and shrunken, turning black and rotting. The level of decomposition from her is one I hadn't seen before. Her hip bones were visible where the skin had cracked and receded. Her kneecaps were coming through her skin, A few ribs were just barely visible, poking through the skin on the sides of her upper abdomen. Her hair was beginning to fall out. Her lips were gone, her eyes were gone. I got a bit closer to look. All I kept thinking was, if you wake up, this officer's probably going to draw and shoot you in the head. I walked a little closer to look. She was almost perfectly preserved like a mummy. There was absolutely nothing left of her eyes. The sockets were completely empty with the exception of maggots crawling around in the sockets. From behind me, I hear a couple quiet, muffled gags. I walk back out to my partner. I tell him, sorry man, but we need the body bag, and I need your help. Everyone walks outside to get some fresh air. The officer that was with me in the bedroom gagged a few more times outside, but luckily didn't vomit. The one thing about this is that we had recently been given these really nice PAPR respirators from FEMA for a recent Ebola outbreak. My partner grabbed the body bag, and I grabbed the PAPRs. We put on our gear and walked back inside. The officer that was with me, like a fucking champ, came back inside as well, without a respirator, and held the flashlight for us. Me and my partner had to spend 10 minutes just clearing out all the trash, so we had enough room to put the body bag down next to the bathtub lady. Once we got enough room, the sketchy part came. If you've ever seen a body with that amount of decomposition, it's very brittle. We attempted to move it as carefully as we could, as to not break anything. However, when we attempted to move her, she was stuck. We couldn't figure out what was going on. I was at the head, my partner was at the feet, trying to move her over. I put my arms down her back and neck to support the head so it didn't break off. I got down to look as I lifted to see what we were getting stuck on. As I lifted, I saw it was already too late. As I lifted, the skin on her back was stuck to the carpet. So as I lifted, it started peeling off her ribs and spine. We had no other choice as we were unable to cut the carpet at this time. As we lifted her up, all of the skin came off her back and stayed stuck to the floor, almost like some sick chalk outline, which is when I saw it. What seemed to be like 1,000 maggots crawling around on the inside of her skin, between the skin and her back. We moved her gently into the bag, luckily not breaking anything. We got the bag out and into the ambulance, where we would then transport her to the funeral home with our windows rolled down and emergent, so we wouldn't have to stay in the ambulance as long as possible. So what's my story of the bathtub lady? Sorry for the gross details. What we figured is she died shortly after our first encounter with her, and that we may have been the last ones to see her alive.